Today, I have the amazing Russell Storey on the Awaken Feminine podcast. Russell is a fellow Perthie, so he is from Perth as well, which is amazing. And yeah, I'm so excited to chat with him. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Kaki. How you doing?
I'm doing great. I know you're doing great, and I'm just excited for our conversation. So Russell and I met a few months ago. I went to do a breathwork session with him because one of my really close girlfriends is like, you need to do this breath work. And I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna go. And oh my gosh, it was like the most amazing thing I've done. It was, yeah. Anyway, I'll talk a bit more about it as we get on with the podcast. But Russell, do you mind sharing with us so people know who you are, and yeah, what you do?
All right. Well, thanks, Kaki, for having me on. I've been very much looking forward to chatting with you. It's each of these conversations are very different, and it's always nice to be asked questions because it gets me reflecting on things that maybe I haven't thought about in a long time. But so yeah, hello everybody. I'm Russell. I'm the founder of Connected Breath. I'm a breathwork trainer and facilitator. So in a sentence, I teach people how to change their lives by changing how they breathe. And so my background in breathwork is with the Transformational Breath Foundation, which is one of the big schools of breathwork in the world. And yeah, I've been doing breathwork for about 11 or 12 years now. So I came across this back in 2010, and it irreversibly changed my life and took me in a direction that I did not expect. And I was living in Edinburgh at the time. And so about 10 years later, I finally managed to get my life in order enough to move home. I wanted to be back closer to my family, and I'd been gone from Australia for nearly 20 years. So the vision had always been to come back to Australia and share this magical thing with people here, because it really is. It's something, as you're saying, Kaki. It's beyond words. It's beyond words. The experiences that we have with this work, and for me, it gives me hope. It gives me hope for people as individuals, but also for our world at large. Because goodness, we really need it right now. Hey, of getting more people aware of what's going on inside them, and giving them the hope and possibility that the change is possible. And that really is what it's been for me. So it's been a bit of a roller coaster journey for the last 10 years or so working with this. My background, I have a corporate background. That was originally what took me over to Scotland in the first place. I was working in a corporate environment over there, doing organizational change management, and it was through a process of burnout, I think is probably the easiest and most succinct way of saying it, that I stumbled across breath work. And as I say, it turned my life on its head, and took things in a very, very different direction. So here I am in the process of launching Connected Breathwork here in Perth, and then hopefully in Australia once we get a little bit more open up, and there's a possibility of sharing this with even more people. So yeah, that's a very, very short summary, Kaki.
Yeah, no, that is fantastic. And I didn't know you were in change management because that's something that I've always been very interested in. So I'll talk to you. I'm sure we'll get to it. But
Subject of
yeah,
another podcast.
the subject of another podcast. Yes. But I just love I just love what you do. I mean, I mentioned before I met you through my girlfriend, and the changes I've seen in her since she started doing breathwork with you is phenomenal, like to say the least. It's just I'm always in awe when she comes to me and she's messaging me. She's like, "Oh my gosh, Kaki, this is what happened." I'm like, "Whoa, like slow down here." There's always, yeah, it's just amazing. And yeah, it definitely is life changing. I mean, I know you and I know her, and I know there's lots more people that it's changed lives for. So, Russell, I want to ask you, I always ask my guests this question. I mean, you're my third male guest. Okay. So I don't usually have male guests on my podcast, just not because I don't like men. It's just simply because, I want to find male guests that I feel aligned to. And, Russell, you're my third male guest. So I'm just excited to have you on. I always ask my guests this question, and I know you're a man, but when I say the term awaken feminine, what does that bring up for you? Like, what do you see that term mean?
Honestly, I it's a big term
Mm.
for me. I have known a lot of women in my time, particularly in the breathwork field. There's a lot of women who work with this modality, and so I'm in the minority in most instances when it comes to breathwork. And so I've met a lot of, I guess, what I would describe spiritual women over the years, and I've met some amazing women, some very powerful and very remarkable women over those years working in breathwork, and obviously before. And I'm fortunate enough to be related to a couple that I consider remarkable. But yeah, when I think of awakened, I think for me it's about a soul connection. It's a soul connection to one's own sense of why am I here and what am I here to do, and also an ability to recognize things as they are, rather than necessarily through an idealized lens, if you know what I mean. For me, because for me, I can't speak as a woman, but having gone through, I guess, an awakening process of sorts, if you can call it that, has actually been very disruptive and challenging. And that process of awakening is not one that is easy, or has been easy for anybody that I've met over the years. And it's taken a lot of commitment and a lot of persistence and perseverance to maintain integrity while going through that process. And I know there's a lot of collective female pain. I've encountered a lot of it over the years, and yeah, it's interesting working as a male breath worker, because as I say, you do work, I end up working with a lot of women. Again, we speak very generally, and so I'm a little bit uncomfortable even categorizing male and female, because it exists within all of us and all that kind of jazz.
Yeah.
But there's something about how do we sort of hold the duality of, yes, there's a collective female pain body and pain experience, but also our only way of working through that is to have a sense of self and a solid connection to one's purpose and one's reason for being. And so the ability to work through some of that emotion and emotional trauma, not just from this lifetime, but quite often, from elsewhere as well, and to get to that place of soul purpose. I think maybe that's a way of and being on track and in alignment with that soul process and or soul purpose. And that's what I see with a lot of my clients, a lot of people that I work with. They're on that journey of awakening, and I don't know if that journey ever ends. You know what I mean? I think it's an ongoing process of being present with what is manifesting and materializing in the present moment, and then consciously creating, I guess what would unite most people in this is we're attempting to create a more loving future, and a more loving future for humanity, and that's all of us. And I think for me, the awakening process, as I said at the beginning of my answer, is being able to open up and hold the fullness, more and more fullness of our experience, which includes the rough and the smooth, and our ability to own our own part in that, and then not use our own pain or our own projections as a filter that we then impose on the world, and to be able to see and experience the world with, I guess, a level of clarity and integration. So yeah, does that answer the question?
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah. As you were talking, this question, I don't mean this question, this thought came in. So I'm going to ask you, as a man, when you had your awakening, because you talked about how we have both masculine and feminine energies, like we all have that. Do you feel that when you are going through your awakening is like awakening the feminine energy within you? You don't need to answer it if it feels, but yeah, it's just what came through.
Yeah, sure. No is the short answer.
Okay.
No. And I say that because I'm probably a guy that's always leaned a little closer to the feminine. I've always had a sense of my own sensitivity, and I'm for better or worse, I've been a relatively kind of aware person most of my life, and I've struggled with some of that, of growing up in Australia, having emotions as a man is a little You know, it can be brutal. Let's be honest, it can be
Yes.
brutal. But my awakening, if we can, again, we call it that, was actually related to the death of my father.
Mm.
And he passed away in 2015. And so a lot of my awakening process was connected to my responsibility that I felt for my family, but also an awareness of the contribution that my dad had made in our lives, a lot that we didn't see.
Yeah.
And that we couldn't really tell, because I grew up, you know, my mom is awesome. She, very long story short, my dad developed epilepsy when I was about 9 or 10 years old. He developed grand mal seizures and really rocked our family to its core. And my mom, you talk about putting in a shift. She's amazing. You know, she raised 4 kids pretty much, you know, on her own. And so we had a very feminine dominated environment growing up. And that was where, you know, my sensitivity to emotion, my sensitivity and awareness to I guess the matriarch of our family. And so as I say, my awakening was actually restoring that balance within myself. And how do I integrate my own masculinity in a way that I'm comfortable with, but I don't betray my own power. And I actually, one of my favorite expressions is the baby in the bathwater.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I've seen with the awakening of men, if you can, is we actually have a deep love for women. And it's not spoken about. And in many ways, it's very unhealthy. You know, it's projected very unhealthy in our culture and all those kinds of things that we're very well versed in. But for me, it was actually about restoring that balance, because even my breathwork training was very female dominated. The lady who runs Transformational Breath, or co-created Transformation Breath, she's an amazing lady, absolutely amazing lady. But that field draws a lot of female energy to it, and which is very powerful. Like if you've been in the presence of a grounded, you know, you could call like a, you know, sacred feminine, like it is something to behold. It is something to behold. And so in that way it did, you know, to answer your question, it did I guess influence me in that way. But my awakening process was actually almost like that, of rebalancing it into, okay, well, what does healthy integrated masculine look, feel, sound like? And so the awakening of the feminine was kind of a reference point to that, if that makes sense. And because as I say, I've got loads of women in my life that I love to bits, and they've always been a big part of my life, and I hope always will. But as I say, having an emotionally absent father for a lot of my teenage years, reconnecting into what that is, has been part of that process. And as I say, reclaiming my power. So to bring it into a breathwork, just to bring breathwork into it. So for people who aren't familiar with breathwork at all, when we're looking at somebody breathing, we can sort of tell a lot about them by where they are and aren't breathing in their body. And so loosely speaking, our chest is connected to love, our solar plexus connected to control, and our belly is connected to power. And so a lot of my own personal process with breath was actually coming into my body and claiming my own body and claiming my own masculinity, because my chest and my sensitivity was just much more familiar. You know, I was always the diplomat at work. I was not someone that really liked or sought out conflict. But I disassociated from my own power. And some of that was because of, you know, a lot of the negative projections that were dumped on me as a teenager or as a young man trying to find my place in the world. And I was hearing all these things and being like, well, that's not me. That's not how I function or operate. But there was quite the silence around what does healthy, intuitive masculinity actually look like? Because as I say, I'm not a chest beating, tattoo, beard kind of person. I believe in a much more subtle form of power, and not even believe, but, you know, I've experienced a much more subtle form of power and presence, which is really, and then for me, learning that integrated masculinity is about creating a container for that feminine to flourish and to create a level. And that's what I do as a breath worker, is I create and hold a space of safety for people to then experience whatever they experience within that. And so, yeah, and I will go as far as saying I'm not the finished article by any stretch of the imagination. I've had to work through my own bits and pieces, my own shame. And, you know, once you get into the topic of sexuality and you know, male female dynamic, all this kind of stuff. It's very it's complex, and part of my training as a breath worker was how do I maintain a level of neutrality, when working with the feminine, and working with, maybe I'm working with, an attractive female, like I still got male biology going on and hormones and all those types of things. And so it's about how do we find that space of almost like that balance. We're aiming for that balance of the openness for the expression of emotion and the exploration of the felt body, but also hold that strength and be able to maintain presence whilst people are diving deep into their emotional experience. And so I think that's again,
yes,
am I on the right track?
Yes, you are totally on the right track. And you made me tear up, because it's just beautiful that you are able to just be so vulnerable and share the struggles that you have as a man to find that balance between, I guess, when we think about masculine in our society right now, it is that power, that control, that I'm getting emotional. And then seeing you, this beautiful soul who's sensitive, and then find that balance is just beautiful. So, oh gosh, I don't cry a lot in my podcast, and there's only a few people that do. So, but this morning I cried again on a live, and then now you've got me going. But it's just beautiful. So thank you. That was a beautiful explanation. Coming from your heart. So thank you. Oh, okay, I'll sort myself out. Don't worry. But the question I will have for you next is really, I would love for you to tell us about how you found breathwork, because you talked about being burnt out in your career. Did you stumble across it, or were you actively looking for did you know about breathwork before then?
I did. Yeah, I did know a little bit about it. I'd experienced some breathwork before. So I've always had, I guess you could say, a curiosity about the human experience. In my early 20s, or actually my late teens, I started university way too young. I was a year ahead of myself at school, and also my birthday was at the far end of the year. So a lot of my friends are nearly 2 years older than me. And so I ended up at university when I was 16.
Oh.
And in retrospect, that was far too young. But try telling a 16-year-old what to do, right? And so I can remember, my older brother gave me the book The Road Less Traveled by M. Scott Peck. And that was really the kickstarter to that whole personal development journey. So that started, I think, about 19 or 20 in my late teens, early 20s. And so I'd always had kind of a curiosity about how we think, how we work, how life hangs together. And then I read this book, and I was like, oh my goodness, there's this whole field on psychology, and so that was kind of in the back burner. And then I finished university. I went traveling. Again, very long story short, ended up over in Edinburgh with a couple of friends, and with a vision of, as I say, I'd studied business at university, and I wanted to go and get a job and make my way in the world and those types of things. And stumbled into change management, as I mentioned at the beginning, because I had very limited interest in banking or anything related to that stuff. But I was fascinated with how people work and how people work together, and that was really what sort of lit my fire from a professional sense. And so I was over in the UK to gain some experience. I ended up meeting a girl, falling in love, all that kind of fun stuff in a way that I didn't expect. And but unfortunately, she suffered from really severe depression, and I was in my 20s. I didn't know what I was dealing with. I thought love was the answer, and one of those harsh life lessons is that it's more complicated than that, and love is part of the answer sometimes, and also depends on what kind of love you mean, I suppose, as well. And I was working very hard. I was working with one of the banks that went under during the great financial crisis, as it's been christened. So we lost all our savings. All my savings were in bank shares, part of a plan to come back here to Australia. And I got to a point, as I say, she was just, I won't go into personal details, but anyone who's lived or been around or cared for someone with depression, they'll know what I'm talking about. It's it's not nice for anybody, least of all the person experiencing it, but those who are caring for people who are really suffering. It's very, yeah, it's a very, yeah, it's a tough journey, and to care for someone that you can't help is hard, and so it was actually a moment of just sheer desperation, and it was like, what on earth do I do now? Because I was 28, 29, and I was out of answers as to what I was supposed to be doing with my life. And on the surface, I had all the material things that somebody my age would be working towards, and I had a pretty positive upward trajectory with the organization that I was in, and people were telling me that, I can go really far, and maybe I could run the place one day, and all these kinds of things. It was very nice, but internally I was really suffering, and I'm not sure anyone listening has had those moments where you have these horrible realizations that if you continue the way you're going, it's not going to end well. And so I was kind of had this split of, I was with somebody that I cared deeply about and wanted to see get better and healthy, and at the same time I was running out of fuel. And so yeah, I remember I was sitting on the couch and I just had this kind of asking the universe moment of, what do I do now? And wherever these answers come from, what came through was, you need to breathe. And I was like, well, I've done that before, and I'd done some rebirthing work as part of my personal development journey and trying to sort my own stuff out. And so I Googled conscious breathing and good old Google, and what came back was there was this thing called transformational breath, and I didn't know what that was. And then this lady who became, a mentor and teacher figure in my life, Judith, her line when she was talking about breath work, she said, full mental health is possible. And that was one of those moments, when you're in the thick of a firestorm and somebody says something like that, it can be quite provocative. But at the same time, I was like, there was something in me was like, I got to stay open to this, and I'm not going to criticize before I give it a go. And so I Googled transformational breath UK. Turned out my dear friend Anne-Marie, I can call her that now, because she was just someone who was running a workshop that I went to see. But she was one of only 3 people in the whole of the UK that was delivering this work, and she just happened to be running a workshop the following week, and it was less than a mile from my house. And so it was one of these moments, like everything just went boom, 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 and lined up. And I went along, and it just blew my mind. It just blew my mind, and it gave me hope that there was a way through all this stuff, because it was beyond what I could think my way through. And so, we're talking masculine, feminine, like the masculine go-to is very often up here. And it's, how do we come up with a plan? How do we make things happen? How do we, and out of this genuine desire to care but I wanted to fix it. I wanted to fix it. And that's probably taken me into the deepest lesson of breathwork, is you can't fix anybody. And on one level, no one needs fixing, right? Because that's, I know that's quite a metaphysical out there concept, but everybody's following their own path and following their own journey. And what we do with breathwork is open people up to that journey and show them this is your path. And as a breath worker, you can be with them through that. You can support them through that. You can coach and counsel and offer advice for what it's worth, but nobody can do it for you. And that was, for me, it was just a breakthrough experience of, and it gave me a container to work through my own stuff. And again, those along that journey will realize we are just mirrors for each other. And so that was a situation that was orchestrated by wherever the stuff was orchestrated from, to show us all about ourselves and learn all about ourselves. And that was the deepest lesson for me, was that I had to learn to care for myself, because caring for other people just came much more naturally to me. And yeah, it was easier in one way. But it's also that thing of, who was containing my pain? Who was there caring for me? Because my identity was fused around my ability to care for somebody else and to create a life and to lead the way, if that makes sense to anybody, and to step into a space of, all right, it's okay to accept my emotions. It's okay. My emotions are valid. They matter. And keeping them contained inside a box somewhere that all it's going to do is breed dysfunction in my life. So moving, I guess I'd describe it, into a more emotionally aligned way. And yeah, so that sort of started me on the journey. And I was joking with people even just on the weekend, like I had no plan to do this, Kaki. This was not part of my this wasn't part of my schedule of events, if you could call it that. It wasn't. I didn't expect to be at this stage in my life teaching people how to breathe, but it just unfolded that way, and it triggered a very significant transformational process in my life. That relationship unfortunately ended, and I had to kind of switch roles in my life to go from this being a caregiver into being I guess on that process of discovery of what do I actually want. And what I learned is that I want to live in a more loving world. I want people to be kinder, and I want our world to be more peaceful. And I didn't want to work in an organization that just harvested humanity for all it was worth. And so yeah, that was my journey into connecting into my heart, and trusting that was something that I had to trust. And as I say, it's been a 12 year process of riding with the waves of life. And as I was saying, you asked me the question about the awakened feminine. For me, it's in some ways it's the same, right? It's waking up to the fullness of the life experience, and life is painful sometimes, and we all go through loss and grief, and yet we all have the ability to feel joy and bliss beyond our imagination. But we have to be open to both of those. We can't have, they don't exist. They're not mutually exclusive. The emotional experience of a human being is the full range. And so yeah, it was a journey into my emotions. That was something that I had to balance with a professional career, because I still had financial commitments and a mortgage and all these kind of fun things. And yet I was starting to be opened up to experiences and dimensions of reality that I had no previous awareness of. And journeying through that, it's very interesting, because as I say, I trained in many instances. I was the only guy in the room, and a lot of the women were a lot older than me. And being respectful, when I say a lot, they were 15, 20 years older than me. So I was in my early 30s. I was working with people in their 50s. They'd been through a deeper set of life experiences, and it gave me exposure to seeing that people are doing their best at every stage of life. And yeah, that if we're going to get through this mess, we've got to do it together, and there is a power in being part of a community that supports each other and loves each other, and has that intention, that loving intention for the world. But also trusting that it's a very subtle thing. The spirit is a subtle energy in many ways, and it's this process of building trust and building faith, our own faith in our connection to that. And so yeah, so that led me on the path. I still wasn't ready to jump into this full time until, as I say, it was around the time my dad died, and those experiences change you. Again, anyone who's listening who's been through that experience of losing a loved one that's close to them, or a parent, it recalibrates a lot of your life and a lot of the expectations you have about how life is going to be. And so being with I was fortunate enough to be able to be with my dad through the last few sort of months of his life, and you learn a lot about yourself through that experience. And for me, I learned a lot about love. I learned a lot about the love from my family and the love from my friends, and that's really what's important. It's really what's important. And so yeah, so I made the commitment that I was going to go on and train to become a trainer in this work, and that's what I did. I went back to the UK and completed my transformational breath training. So became a senior trainer within the foundation, and as I say, then the grand plan was always to come back here and be closer to my family. And so that kind of unfolded in 2019. And I got here just before everything the world kind of went whoop and turned on its head. But yeah, again, it's been a challenge. It's been a challenging dynamic being home, because I haven't had the same freedom and even just the freedom to speak. That's been taken from us this last little while. But but there's lessons in everything. And sometimes to experience the dark is the fastest path to awakening, right? It's the fastest path. And to accept that it exists, and to know that it exists, and to know that about ourselves, and that we're all part of that. I actually put my personal belief is that's going to be what we've all been through this last few years, is going to be a catalyst for a lot of people to start connecting to their own deeper selves, and showing up more authentically, and more in a more meaningful way, ultimately. But that doesn't mean it hasn't been a journey. But as I say, breathwork teaches us, right? Breathwork brings us back into the moment, and it allows us to see that the universe is doing its thing perfectly all the time, like all the time. And we might not like that. And that might involve us, working through extraordinary discomfort and painful emotions and experiences, but they're just as part of the human experience. And our ability to be present, to honor those, and to and get to the point of welcoming them. And don't get me wrong, some pretty nasty stuff can happen. People can go through some pretty. I see that very regularly with breathwork. Very, very few people come to breathwork just for shits and giggles. There's usually something that's bringing them along. They've either suffered enough, or they're in a situation that they, like myself, I didn't have the skills and resources to be able to handle it at that point in time. And so these difficulties can actually become doorways and gateways into other ways of experiencing the world. And I often say that to my clients who have experienced trauma. Trauma takes us to the places we wouldn't choose to go. If you've been through a traumatic event, it's quite possible that there was very little choice in that situation. Maybe you made a mistake, or maybe it was an absence of or lack of judgment, but the experience was not fair, and it was not okay, and the effects of that are very real. And but the journey into that is to be able to accept that exactly as it is. And that's actually where the magic happens in breathwork, is if we can move into that place of acceptance, we can recover a lot of energy from trying to keep things in place. And I know through my own experiences, I've been through traumatic experiences that have maybe resulted in humiliation or embarrassment, and I don't want to talk about them. I don't want anyone to know about them, and yet they've happened, and that's how it is. So the quicker we can get to that acceptance, the quicker we can then allow that experience to either complete, and you would have experienced that in your breathing session. We have these things we call them holding patterns, and they're the patterns in our you could say our subconscious, or our nervous system, or however you want to frame it, where we've been through an experience and we've contracted, and we're holding on because if we breathe, we feel, and sometimes we go through things that we don't want to feel, and they're very uncomfortable to feel, and they can be very disorienting. And again, if they're traumatic, they can be destructive to feel. And so it's about having patience and respect for the systems in us that are trying to protect us, but then creating enough sort of emotional and spiritual safety for people to move into these more challenging experiences and allow what's ultimately a transformational process to occur. And we can learn the wisdom in these experiences, and that they're here to teach us, and hold that frame of, life is really just a schoolyard that lasts on average about 75, 80 years, and we're here to learn. And that maturation for me has been learning that difficult things happen, people die, things end. Life is sad sometimes, and grief can last for decades, and it changes us, and yet to be with that, the same grief, the same pain can be a catalyst for just beauty beyond anything you can put into words, to be able to have glimpses of that divinity, glimpses of the perfection. I can remember around the time that my dad died, and it was so messed up on so many levels. And I remember I had this moment sitting on the end of my bed, and it was just like, it's the world kind of just collapsed in, and my mental arguments and my emotional arguments around this isn't what I want him to get better, and and it was like, and here we are, and everybody's together, and can I open to the possibility that his passing is going to transform not just my life, but hundreds and maybe thousands of lives of people that he was part of their life. And so if we can start to see life through this wider lens, then we can really sort of tap into the magic of the human experience. But as I say, that magic requires us to be grounded, requires us to be embodied, and requires us to be willing to be with our experience regardless of what that happens to be. And then I think, that's where my work comes into it, because I can give people direct experience of that. And I think everyone that I've breathed over the years, the thing about breath work is something always happens. Someone lies down and connects their breath for an hour, something's going to happen. And we have no idea what that's going to be, but we know that it's going to be in alignment with their highest good, and that they're going to be experiencing something that is ultimately going to provide fuel for their personal evolution. And so that's what this last few years have been for me, of really digging deep and trusting that we are in this much larger transformational process, which is beyond any of us as individuals. And as like with your amazing work of, like lighting up, I guess you call it, one side of the fence with the feminine, really stepping up, and sharing these values of love and care and compassion and concern for everybody, and that it all fits, that life fits, it all fits in, and that is almost the part of that process of expansion and growth. Certainly through my experiences, you see things from this wider and wider lens, and you develop an appreciation just for the miraculous nature of life. Just the miraculous nature, the fact that this all exists and that we're all here, and that's that in itself. And then you dive into breath work and you start opening up to mystical experiences and a real magic of consciousness. So I'd say my job is to learn to trust that it does know what it's doing, this awakening process. Sometimes it feels like a little bit like, I don't know if you ever watched a chick hatch from an egg, and and you kind of want to get in there and help them and be like, come on. But actually that's part of the process, and it strengthens it. If I can go with another analogy, it's often shared in the breathwork world as when a butterfly emerges from its cocoon. So the story goes, there was experiments in exactly that process of, they had a control group of butterflies that emerged at their own rate. And when a butterfly emerged from a cocoon, but they went and cut the cocoon open and allowed the butterfly to come out, even though it was fully formed, it didn't have the strength in its wings to fly away, because part of that opening process was what created blood flow within the capillaries within the wings of the butterfly. So the butterfly hadn't actually developed enough strength to be able to fly, because that emergence process was part of it. And so for me, that's part of that, accepting that the beauty and majesty of life is when things really suck, it's growing us. For those who have an astrological background, that's Saturn. That's what Saturn is. It teaches us that we things take time, and anything worth doing is worth investing over the longer term. And as I say, whilst things sort of happen in the moment, and our experience of the wonder of the moment, as human beings, we also have the ability to plan a future. We also have an ability to conceptualize and function with time. And sometimes it's only in retrospect that we can understand the meaning of why we had to go through the things that we've been through. And so that's essentially my job as a facilitator, is to normalize the present moment and to welcome it as if it was a friend. And it is, it is. It's probably the best friend we're ever going to have.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing your journey and the beautiful unfolding and all the gold nuggets that you dropped as you were talking. And, one of the things that really stuck out for me was, you learning to have to look after yourself, because you've always been in this caretaker role. And I think, it goes for everyone. I think we're just so used to taking care of other people, we forget to take care of ourselves. So, it's just a beautiful reminder for everyone who's listening that, you need to take care of number one, and that is yourself. And then from there, I mean, it's the cliche, fill your own cup first, and then you can look after people from the overflow. And it is, definitely true. and just remembering like everything that happens to us is part of our journey. And you can be like, I think a lot of people go, oh, I shouldn't be angry, like, things suck. Sometimes shit happens, right, in our lives, and we can be as angry as we want, but then we need to get to that acceptance stage, as you say, to then move through it, because it actually takes a lot of energy to continue to dwell on the sucky thing that happened, because you're just replaying it, and that just brings down your vibration anyway, because you're just putting that on replay. So yeah, just beautiful reminders, and there's so much more, but I don't that you
just one thing to add, and this is I think it's important discussion when we're talking masculine feminine, because people associate anger with the masculine, right? It's like that the one thing, the only emotion my man express or my brother express or whoever expresses is anger, and it's a socially acceptable. And even just learning to be with anger, so in the breath work that I share and I teach, we use sound and movement, and allows people to express those deeper, more energetically fueled emotions. And if we've been through anger or experiencing it, like, anger is just as valid as anything else. But exactly as you say, we get into trouble when we dwell on it, when anger is our go-to and it's our only strategy. Because if we're feeling angry, it's usually because a boundary has been violated, or we're seeing or experiencing some sort of perception of injustice. And so allowing people just the ability to express that, just to let out these primal screams sometimes, and just connect into parts of themselves that they've been shutting away, and they don't want to, because we can be so judgmental about how we are or aren't supposed to feel. And the reality is we feel how we feel. But with breath work, we can process feelings that are maybe not as useful as they could be. And we can create freedom from those, and we ultimately create choice. And we're no longer a slave to our emotions. We're no longer a slave to the past patterns or the traumas of our childhood, or things maybe we don't even remember. And so being able to verbalize that, being able to go there, that's, as I say, that's then when the transformation can happen, and we can realize that, okay, I'm angry because I was in pain, and I had every reason to be in pain because something really bad happened or very uncomfortable happened. But allowing that to be expressed, it's with breath work, it's I won't say it's gone, but it's integrated. And we can integrate with the practicing of this breath practice. We can integrate the roots of those experiences, and we can get free from them. And then we can have conscious integrated anger, which actually guides us into action and allows us to be more precise in what we want to do. But we're not moving away from our pain. We're moving towards creating something that's actually going to protect. And as I say, you're working. Very few of us have integrated. You could argue, 𝐸𝐸, that growing up is a traumatic experience. As we move through life,
it actually is.
We do. I've got little nieces and nephews, and I love them to bits. And there's part of me that's like bracing myself for the knocks that they're inevitably going to encounter in this lifetime. The human experience is a contact sport on one level. It's an emotional contact sport, because we don't act independently from anybody else. We're all interconnected. And I
totally agree with that. I look at my daughters and see the interaction, and I'm thinking, I wonder what traumatic experience that's going to lead to that they need to solve when they're older. But it is, it definitely is like I love you talking about how we can actually use that anger, that energy, to actually create something beautiful. It's like that transmutation of energy, using it for creation. Because, okay, why are you angry about it? Okay, I don't like that. Okay, how can we funnel that to create something that where we're happy, Do you mind me talking about my experience with you?
I was actually going to ask you, because rather than me talk about it. Go
So
for it.
yeah, I
Go for
really
it.
want to talk about because so like I said before, I met Russell through my girlfriend, and she's like, he changed my life. And I'm always someone that likes to have different experiences. And I did need to do like at that time when I went to see Russell, there were a lot of things happening in my life that I just wanted to release. So I went in, no expectations, went to see Russell, and he just provides such a beautiful, loving space. And like what he talked about at the beginning about that divine masculine holding the feminine, that's what he provides. So yeah, I felt really safe because I think for a lot of women, like you said, like a lot of the times it's the women that do the breathwork facilitation is very more like, there's more women in this field of work. So sometimes maybe women might be like, oh, it's a man, I don't want to go there. But, go to Russell. He's so chilled. He's just beautiful. Like his energy is so beautiful. I felt very safe. And I remember he's like, okay, let me see how you breathe. And then the first thing he said to me was, you are a controller. You like to be in control and you like to do things your way. I'm like, how did you know that from just looking at me breathe? I just remember that. I was like, what? And then you did explain to me, like, you talked about it before, how you breathe from the chest and in the middle and the belly. But I was just like, oh, wow, this is, yeah. And then we went into the breath work, and oh my goodness, I did not expect. I've done breath work before, obviously on my own, but not with someone and doing this type of breath work. But it was intense, but at the same time, there was so much release. I think not everyone has this tetany that you talk about when you were explaining to me, but I think I had so much going on that my hands were like this, like they were like claws the whole time. I couldn't release it. It was, yeah, because I was just, holding so much in my body. So yeah, that was me the whole time. And I could feel like, pins and needles the whole time. And then there was, and then you were pressing on pressure points on me. Yeah. And just the sound release and the movement release, that was just like next level. And then I know that I just kind of, my mind was just kind of out there. Like it was like you're guiding me through my breath, but then I was also not. I was in my body, but like I was also out there as well. And then because I'm quite connected with like some light language, so my hands just started doing things on its own. And then afterwards, that integration that you provide this beautiful space to just after the breath work to just kind of like just be and integrate and hang out and yeah, and then I'm going to show my woo side now, but I just remember Jesus coming in and just telling me, you're doing great, and some other things. But it was just like, wow, this is such a magical experience. I'm getting emotional again. Russell, what are you doing to me?
What can I say?
But yeah, it was just a beautiful experience. And then, I got along really well with Russell, and we, had a good old chat as well. But yeah, I highly recommend it. And I have to say, like, I'm not very good with doing it on my own. So like if I ever do breath work, I need to like be with people like to guide me through it. So yeah, I actually was thinking about you the other day. I was like, oh, I need to go see Russell again, but we can talk about that after. But yeah, I highly recommend just doing the work that Russell does, because it really is life-changing.
Can I just add something to what you're saying there, Kalki?
Yeah.
I know you kind of caveat it with your woo-woo side.
Yeah.
But as a breath worker, I have lost count of the amount of times people have those types of experiences when I'm working with them.
Mm.
And for me, this is what got me hooked initially into breath work, was these non-physical experiences that just defied any semblance of logic or fit any remote part of the script of my life at that point. And for people to have those spiritual experiences, to connect with, with Jesus, or connect with, whoever, I have people experience connections with angels. I have connections with people who have passed away, all sorts of things. And these experiences of these shifts in consciousness. And so that is part of my job, is to help normalize those experiences for people and help them build trust in their own experience. And, I try not to share too much about client stories, but it's just, you get to a point where logic just doesn't, the materialist scientific understanding of the world just doesn't cut it.
Yeah.
It just doesn't cut it. It's and it's not to say it's not valid for what it's designed to do. Let's build bridges and make computers and all those kinds of things where, where maths and engineering and the scientific method are really important. But when we're exploring human consciousness, like, the rule book just gets thrown out the window. And the number of people who come back and they've had a connection with someone that, and they're like, I can feel them. They're here in the room right now. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
And even if it's me just saying, I believe you. I believe you. And because for me, that is part of the disconnection that we experience in our society. And part of it's through, obviously, the speed of technology and all these types of things. But, once someone's had a direct spiritual experience, you can't talk them out of it.
No.
It happens, and it happened, and it might not necessarily mean what they think it means or whatever, but the experience is very, very genuine. And when I say it might not mean what it means is whatever it means to them. But often I'm very reluctant, again, to talk about some of this stuff in too much depth, because I don't want to preload people's expectations around what they're going to experience during a session.
Yeah.
But what I do say in all of my workshops now is that I hope your experience is meaningful to you and for you, whatever that happens to mean within the frame of somebody's life.
Yeah.
And but I'm even, I've been in public workshops, 𝐸𝐸, where we just have I won't even go into it, because I don't think people would believe me if I communicated it, because it's but I do believe we're on the front edge of that wave. You talk about the awakening process into spirituality coming back into our lives in a very big way. And I don't even mean that from the dogmatic sense or the religious sense or anything like that, but that just people have a reconnection to their own innate humanness and their own divine core, which I believe exists within everyone. Some people have forgotten it and some people have cut themselves off for it. That's a whole nother thing. But this reconnective journey that people go on and they discover, and I have the number of people come back and go, but I was just breathing. How did that happen? I was just breathing. It's like, yeah, look at what you can create. Look at what we can create within our own experience. And once people have had that experience, there's really no turning back. It's a bit of a Matrix red pill kind of moment of and then how far down the rabbit hole do you want to go? And I said this to the guys on the weekend. I'm still journeying, and it shows no sign of slowing down. But I do believe that of bringing the subtle back into our day-to-day life and helping people feel connected to themselves and connected to the world around them in a really profound way, and connecting to their own purpose. That's a big one that I see of and for me, right, of going, I didn't have the guts to just chuck everything in and walk away and become a breath worker. I had to go through that process. It just wasn't an overnight happening for me. It was a process of rational inquiry and integrating all this stuff into my life, and then being able to communicate it in a way that people weren't going to laugh me out of the room. And but then I've seen over the course of that 10 years as well, our society has shifted in a way that I don't think anyone could have expected. And I see almost a vacuum at the moment for that kind of experience, because going back to the baby in the bathwater, people have shitty experiences with religion as a child or teenager, and they throw their spirituality out the door at the same time. And so giving people the mechanisms to be able to come back to themselves and be able to, I've had people, reconnect with their own Christian faith or reconnect with their own philosophy as to how the world works. they and trusting that there's not just breath work, there's loads of other tools out there that people can utilize to start to restore alignment with their own soul journey.
Yeah. I really think like breath work is not just go once and then you're done. It's something that needs to be practiced, consistently. I have lots of things in my toolkit. So I do breath work with my meditation, but not the type that Russell does. Russell's one is like, next level breath work. So, but what I really think is, go and experience, find the thing that you need in your toolkit to help you get connected to yourself, and then maybe also then get connected to, what is out there, or, because like you say, I really believe that right now there is an acceleration of people awakening, and it is people like yourself, and many of the other guests that I have on my podcast, which are helping people along to kind of go navigate that awakening, because it's scary. And especially if you were anyone like someone like me who was so logical, like pharmacist, science, and then all of a sudden you get connected, you're like, what the hell is happening? Finding that community, finding the tools and the people is so important. So I just thank you for, the work that you do, Russell, because, I've experienced it myself and it's amazing. And obviously my girlfriend also thinks that as well. I mean, this change I see in her is just phenomenal. So yeah, thank you for coming back to Perth.
You're most welcome.
Yeah.
So I think just to build on what you were saying, you're absolutely right. Like if someone comes along for a facilitated session, it's not something that you're going to be able to mirror all on your own.
Yeah.
But what I attempt to teach people is that this is about building a relationship with our own breath. And so even if I can just open that door for people to have that taste of what's possible, it might be 5 or 10 years down the track. That's sometimes how deep this work can impact us. And it gives us food for thought. I've worked with many people I used to work with when I was in banking. They come along to my workshops and they would have a session and they'd be looking at me, and you could tell they were like, I am totally not ready to deal with any of this right now. And my job was to accept that where they're at, and then trust that maybe it's sowed a seed that will blossom at some point in the future, but to give them that opportunity to understand that there is a window or a doorway that if they choose to open it, that they can experience some profound and powerful things. But part of my journey as well is learning that it's not for everybody. Not everybody is on this path. Not everyone, it's just not their journey this time round. And I guess that's what I mean by the fullness, right? The fullness of awakening is to be accepting things as they are, rather than having this kind of background intention of, if I could just change everyone and everything, then it will all be okay.
Yeah. Because
it's just more complicated than that. The world is a more complicated place than that. And those of us that are in this field are kind of holding a frequency, and trusting that will emerge, and that spirit will do its thing in its own time, and we'll be here to enjoy the show and be part of it. But as you're saying, that awakening process for anyone who's going through it, if you're doing it properly, it's probably not going to be easy, and it's going to be confronting. It's going to be destabilizing. It's going to be confusing, and so building a community of people that you can speak to. My friends are an absolute lifeline for me around helping me stay grounded, helping me work with things that I don't fully understand or don't. I'm not an expert in, and we all kind of fumble forward together, but it's all connected by the same love and desire to care for each other and leave the world a little bit better place than we found it. And but as I say, trusting that wider perspective, and that's what breath work can do. It can bring us, like you mentioned, about that sort of meta state that can be experienced during the session. It's almost like, I don't want to put in your words in your mouth, Kaki, but it's like a witness. We're able to witness our experience in a very different way, and we can hear someone talking to us, and we can experience ourselves breathing, and yet there's something happening within our consciousness that sort of transcends language.
Yeah.
But that experience is far easier to experience than it is to explain. And because as I say, it's going to be different for everybody every time anyway. So,
Yeah. Actually, I want to mention this one last cool piece of it. I didn't tell you, but when I was doing the breathwork session with you, I saw this eye, like the Egyptian looking eye, the eye. Yeah. And then the next day I was pulling out a card. It was exactly the same eye. And the card was big, bold vision. So
there you go.
yeah. So I didn't tell you that, but I thought you might like to know. But while we're on air and recording this session. Russell, I'm just looking at the time. And I don't want to keep you longer than I should. But this conversation we've had is just so beautiful. So I thank you for sharing your story, your vulnerabilities, and your magic. For people listening out there, what's something you want them to take away after listening to our conversation today?
Your breath is your friend. Your breath is your friend, and so build a solid friendship with it. And I don't know where that came from, but that's what popped up when you asked me that question. Was and it's becoming our own friend, our own closest ally, our own relationship to the divine. There's some people conceptualize breath as spirit moving in and out of the body. I've certainly had experiences like that, and yeah, it is a journey. It's a journey to getting to know yourself and learn about yourself. And the beauty, I teach this in a lot of my workshops. Breath impacts all levels of our being. It helps us get physically healthy. It helps us work on a mental, emotional level, and it can also connect us to our own spirituality. And so, any conscious breath is going to facilitate that process, becoming more and more aware. I even did that, just before I came online. Coming on a podcast, bearing my soul a little bit is, it's being vulnerable is for me is a process. And so I was just sitting here, slowing down my breathing, getting myself present, and aim to sort of show up in the best way that I can. So yeah, let your breath become your friend. And there are lots of amazing teachers out there in the world. People come to me, they've experienced Wim Hof breath work. They've maybe experienced, there's people breathing like the Navy SEALs do. They do box breathing, and you have, people doing rebirthing and biodynamic body release breath work. So much more integrative, deep breath work. So there's a whole world of breath work. And it really is, one of the most powerful tools you can incorporate into your practice. And probably lastly, start small. Start small. Of course, if you want to come along to a workshop, or you want to come along and experience this with someone who's training breath work, that can really accelerate that process. But little steps, it's like building a muscle. We do it a step at a time, and or a bit like, and sometimes it's a bit like, it's a bit like chopping a tree. It feels like we're not getting anywhere, and then suddenly we'll hit that spot, and then we'll experience a significant change. And so yeah, become friends with your breath, and I think that's enough for me.
Yeah, I love that came through. So thank you for sharing that last bit of wisdom. So Russell, if people want to find out more about you and your breath work and all that you do, where's the best place to find you?
So connectedbreath.com.au. It's my website. You can follow me on Instagram and Facebook. I'm getting better versed at putting myself out there on social media and just sort of sharing more information. If you're in Perth, I've got regular workshops running. I won't go into details here. You can check those out online, but I'm trying to get venues around the city that people will, have regular access to this. And then I'm going to be running training programs as well. So if people want to dive deeper and deeper into the breath, then that's the aim of me being here, is to provide that space for people to really, really go deep and transform themselves, and then ultimately teach other people to share the breath and sort of grow a movement here in Australia. So it seems to be lighting a few people up, and really, it really resonates with them, and they really, yeah, I can see a very bright future for breathwork here in Australia. And yeah, and don't be shy. If you want to, you can drop me an email, or you've got questions or anything. Just let me know, and I'll do my best to respond. And yeah, I'm also available if people are international and they're interested in doing a one-to-one session. I do offer those as well. I can do them on Zoom. And it was one of the benefits of the whole lockdown phase we went through was we had to improvise and learn different ways of working. So I've been running an online group for the last 3 years, and we've discovered that we can experience some pretty amazing things online. So if anyone's interested, then just let me know. So yeah,
Yeah.
it'd be great to hear from you.
Yeah, that's amazing. So reach out to Russell if you're feeling drawn to his work or to him. And yeah, thank you once again, Russell. You're amazing. And yeah, we'll speak again soon.
Nice one. Thanks, Kaki. Really appreciate your time, and thanks for. I'm honored to be the third man on the podcast. It's a privilege. Thank
Yeah.
you.
When I met you, I knew you had to come on. So yeah, thank you.
All right. Thanks, Kaki.